Welcome to Soul Nutrition. I'm your host, Reina Rose. So many of us have been feeling very stuck being in quarantine during this pandemic, feeling stuck in life, stuck in our emotions, or just a little unsatisfied with where we are right now. I have Leith McHugh here to speak with us about the complete reboot that her husband, and her family did in their lives and how it's been rebooting their lives with joy ever since. Leith, please tell us about what led you to reboot your whole life and what does that mean?
Great question. Oh my gosh. Okay. First of all, thank you for having me. This is such an honor. Our family had gone through a lot of trauma. Our daughter had been born without part of her brain back in 1998. And then, that involved 12 years of full-on caregiving 24/7. She was legally deaf, blind, wheelchair bound, could not see, hear, walk, or talk. Had seizures, was on oxygen, fed through a tube. So you can imagine what the day-to-day was like during her life. Our son was coming out as gay 3 months before our daughter, and his name is Holden, before Hadley passed away. And then about 2 years after that, Holden was addicted to drugs and alcohol. And that was quite a surprise to our family. Our marriage was not in a good place. I was finding out some more parts of my story that I was digging around into. And we were kind of just sitting there like, what are we going to do with all of this? This is like too much. It's just too much. So we decided that we were going to find joy somehow in all the mix of all of that. And what that looked like was us kind of individually beginning to get well, pursuing our own healing and help, predominantly through a place called On-Site Workshops outside of Nashville, Tennessee. But our son had then, I think at that point, was headed to rehab. I was getting well, my husband was getting well, and we just said, let's sell this house and sell everything that we own and start over. So we did everything, like dishes, towels, furniture. There was one black tank top that I let go of that I regretted. I was like, dang, I really like that black tank top. Outside of that, we had no regrets.
Wow.
We were just like that. We had built that house for Hadley, for her. It was modified for her wheelchair and everything. And then Holden, a lot had happened in that home in regards to him. So we just felt like the walls, the carpet, the paint, like everything held so much pain. And we just needed to start with getting out of that space. So I put it on Facebook and sent emails to everyone I knew and just said, come pay what you can, take it if you can't. And we sold everything pretty much in about 2.5 days.
2.5 days?
Yeah,
wow. I'm thinking weeks, get rid of all of our stuff. I mean, I've moved before and put things on Facebook Marketplace, right? At 2.5 days. And so how long was it from? So you had already sold your house at the point that you were getting rid of all these things, right?
We had sold our house. We had called a friend of ours that worked at a Young Life camp and just said, hey, is there any space for us? Is there anything we could do? We are pretty maxed out emotionally, but we know that we have something to offer. And so we don't want to be in charge of anything, but if we could just be helping hands. So he was like, yep, got a space for you. We just like, we need our joy engines rebooted. Yeah. And that's where the idea of reboot your life came from, was born out of that. So we had been at Frontier Ranch in Buena Vista, Colorado, and then our house sold. So we came back from there to do this 2-day blast. And then we stored the things that were left. There were still a decent amount of things in regards to like my husband's gear, snow gear, ice climbing gear, rock climbing stuff, camping, all that. And then Hadley, I could not get rid of her things. There were a handful of things I was able to get rid of, but everything else went into storage tubs. And then Holden's things, because he was in rehab. So we still had, like, I would say, a single car garage of things, bikes and stuff like that. But all the house things were out of there.
Wow. Yeah. And those things too, it's like, they're the kind of things that, especially if you take a while
Mhm.
you would have replaced them by the time you come back to them anyway.
Mhm.
You're just not using them in the meantime, which you would if you stayed in the place. So
Yeah.
I want to come back around to, that reboot doesn't look like that for everyone, right? People can do all kinds of different looking reboots, and you've coached people through that. But let's dig in just a little bit, because I've listened to and heard and read so much of your story. And the first time you told me, our daughter was born without part of her brain, it didn't really register the wholeness of that. And then also your son's story of coming out, and like you said, you're in these faith communities, and what that looks like, and how one was going on in a very public scene and the other was going on in a private scene, and how that affected your family. So let's start with Hadley. And so she was born without the back of her brain, is that correct?
Good memory. Yeah. The cerebellum, which is like the cauliflower little piece at the back of the brain. And so she had a teeny tiny bit of that. And then the rest of her brain was really underdeveloped. So cerebellar hypoplasia is what the cerebellum part is called. And then microcephaly, small brain, small head, was the other part. So she kind of had two different things going on, never an actual diagnosis. We just chalked it up as God's gift to us, because there was no explanation. There was nothing genetic, nothing had happened. So no
Right,
diagnosis.
because your pregnancy had went through as normal, all of your what do they call those scans?
Ultrasounds. Yeah.
Ultrasounds. Yeah. You can tell I haven't had a baby. So all of your ultrasounds came through normal, and then you're a few months in, and you're noticing something. Well, you said you noticed as soon as she was born, something just looked a little different compared to other kids. But I was a very ugly looking baby, so I totally I really resonated with you just saying, well, infants look weird, or newborns look weird.
Yes. Yes, they do. Some of them do, So yeah, we chalked it up as that for the beginning. We were like, but Holden was such a pretty baby that we were like, oh wow, this one's unique looking.
My brother was really pretty as well. Like, the nurses went around showing him around, and I was like that cone head was squished with like a purple face, right? So I would joke with him later in life. He was really handsome, but I joked, I said, I came out ugly and ended up pretty, and you came out pretty and you know he was really handsome, though. He didn't have to worry about that.
Oh.
But you noticed something, and then a few months down the road, you started really. What did you start noticing that was really different once you started getting a few months through?
Well, they measure babies' heads immediately and throughout, like, each monthly checkup. I never knew why they did that, and now I know it's because if the head's not growing, something's not right. So she, first of all, had a hearing loss, which they discovered in the hospital before we ever went home. And, they thought there was an issue. So we came back 10 days later, checked it. Yes, there was an issue. So we were devastated. We thought that she was deaf, and we were like, what are we going to do? This is huge. This is such a big deal. And I even said to the audiologist that was starting to come to our house to teach us how to do this life with a deaf child, I said, there wouldn't be anything else wrong with her, would there? And that was at like 2 months old. And she was like, oh no, honey, it would have to be something like her brain. And we know that that's okay, because at the time she was developing pretty normally. There's not a ton that they're doing at that age. So it was kind of hard to tell. But as time grew on, like at her 2-month checkup, she hadn't gained much weight. She wasn't nursing well. Now I put 2 and 2 together and go, oh, neurological issues, not sucking well. Those go together. I think at the time I couldn't see it. I didn't want to see it. I was pretty overwhelmed having 2 kids, 3 and under, and it was just a lot. Newborns are really stressful for me. I go into this freak out mode. So I kind of just thought there was all kinds of things happening. But fast forward, we take her to her 4-month checkup, and he's like, I'm pretty concerned about that head size, because her head hadn't really grown. We had taken her off the breast and put her on formula, thinking she would kind of fatten up and her head would grow, and it hadn't at all. And he was like, ooh, that's really concerning. So we did an MRI at 4 months, and we were like, we know our baby's fine. Like, we weren't even stressed about the MRI, which is very interesting. You would think that in and of itself would cause like some panic. And we were like, we know she's fine. And then that was like on a Wednesday, I think. And then by Monday, we hadn't heard from them. They said, no news is good news. Now we know that no news means not urgent, life-threatening news because they did not call us right away. I called on Monday morning and just said, hey, I'm feeling a little anxious about those results. We still haven't heard back. And they were like, oh, we're going to need to speak to you and your husband in our office at 4:00 today about your daughter's future. I was like, what? I don't even have a category for what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, it's her brain. And so I remember just screaming, calling my husband at work. It's her brain. It's her brain. And I can tell right now also, by the way, I'm in storytelling mode for sake of this interview. Sometimes I'll dip down in here and feel it when I'm sharing. But I just want to acknowledge that I'm kind of just sharing the story right now. So called him and freaking out, panicking, went to the doctor's office, and he just said, this is really going to be hard. It's going to be a lot. We don't know if she'll be kind of mild retardation or if she'll be severe and need care for the rest of her life. And she was the most severe possible, according to the scale.
I remember when I listened to you speaking about your initial reaction when the doctor said it was her brain, and you said, no, I don't. Are you looking at her chart and you're repeating her name for the doctor? Like, this can't be my child. You're probably looking at the wrong chart. I had that same reaction when my brother died, and a friend texted me, hey, I'm so sorry what happened with your family. And I'm like, I think you have the wrong person. What do you mean what happened with my family? And they're like, call your mom. I'm like, what? No category, call your mom. And just had no idea what was going on. And also just thinking, no, nothing's happening with my family. You dialed the wrong person, yes. Because my name wasn't on the text. It was just, I'm sorry what happened. And so I really resonated with that response of, no, this is my child's name. I think you're looking at the wrong chart because my child's fine, right? And so then no, I'm seriously looking at your child. Here's a double check. And then that panic scream, it's her brain. What are we going to do when you're calling your husband, And so I think someone who hasn't been through like the grief of loss, and the hard thing is you've had to grieve so many times, right, throughout Hadley's lifetime, from when you found out about her ears to finding out about the brain to the many times of pneumonia that nearly took her life and then finally did. How did that affect your family? I know your son, Holden, was so attached to her, very intuitive to her needs. They seem to have a nonverbal communication because Hadley never spoke, right? And so they seem to have a communication that was beyond words. And then, of course, he was having to go through that loss over and over and over again as well. How did the whole family, how did it tear you apart and bring you together? I'm sure it did both at many different times.
It's a really good question. I'll say that, so our youngest, Avery, she's almost 20 now, so she's the baby of the family. She was also very close to Hadley and also had that same kind of communication. It just looks so different for her. Hadley was born into Holden's life. Avery was born into Hadley's life. So their experiences were super different. I would say that for Holden, and he's given us permission to share our story publicly, but he really took on the role of, I just won't need anything because their hands are really full. And now that can bring me to tears. That was a lot. And we didn't know that that's what was happening at the time. We actually, well, I'll speak for myself, but I intentionally, like in my mind, chose I will do everything I can to not burden my kid with what Hadley needs and all of Hadley's everything that she needed. So I remember even feeling a little bit weird, like if I'd ask him to go get me a diaper or something, like I was really careful to
because you were
I didn't want to put it on him. It wasn't his job to help me, rescue me, help us take care of the family. He was a little 3-year-old, like it wasn't his job.
And maybe even like above, maybe even too much, because like even with a normal toddler, you'd ask your other, you know, a normal baby, you'd ask your other kid, hey, go grab me a diaper. But maybe because you knew she had so much, you were even more sensitive than had you had just a baby developing normally.
Yeah.
You'd say, hey, go grab me a diaper. Hey, go do this, because you
Yeah.
didn't have that constant 24-hour attention that you needed with Hadley for them. So you're feeling you don't want to burden him, but he felt that anyway, I guess, and just tried to not be a burden to you either. It almost an equal and opposite reaction. You're trying so hard not to burden him, and then he says, I'll try really hard not to burden you too.
Yes. Yes. And that became his MO. And so he got praised for being such a good boy. He was so easy. He was so compliant. He was great in his car seat. He could self-entertain. He could sit at every therapy appointment and doctor's appointment, physical, occupational speech, doctor's appointments, surgeon appointments. And he was such a good boy. And he got praised for that because it was really helpful that he wasn't causing a scene. And so that began this dance of a way that we did life together, and he behaved that way. So I would say that was something that I wish we could undo. Thankfully, we have a beautiful relationship today, and we talk about all of these things, and we have, he's extended incredible amounts of grace to me in that. And I would say, can you ask me again, kind of like, was it like, what were the positive things that kind of came out of that?
Both, you know, how it tore you apart and how it brought you together, because again, I'm sure it had done and still does both at times, right? I mean, these things aren't one dimensional. They're so complicated. And you know, there's so much love, and there's so much stress and so much hardship too. So it tears you apart and brings you together, which you know, rebooting helps the bring the together part, but sometimes the tearing apart happens first.
Yeah, and I would say I felt that more so before her life ended. It was more like us trying to find our way, Holden not being a burden. I went into pretty severe anxiety and depression somewhere in that time. I can't remember how old everybody was at that time, but I was not incredibly present for my kids. Like, just emotionally, I was there. I was a stay-at-home mom, and I was there, but I would say I was kind of checked out at times. And so I can see the ways, and Avery and I have talked about that, the ways that it impacted her as a baby. Like, there's things I don't remember about her being a newborn. Like, I'm like blacked out. I don't remember.
Of course, you had so much on your plate that's not what you were thinking about. And being able, I mean, and having grace with yourself, being able to be really present with that, because you had such a constant need over here.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, those are kind of off the top of my head, the ways that I see us getting pulled apart. I know my husband and I, we just kind of locked arms. We're a great team. We've always liked each other a lot. And so when Hadley was alive, we locked arms and like plowed the field together. Really, our starting to be pulling apart happened after she died, and after Holden got into rehab. It was almost like, what do we do now that we don't have crisis and chaos? We're really good together as a team in crisis and chaos. We bring like Norm into our life, and we're like, oh, who are you? How do we do this? So that's,
isn't that the case with so much trauma? You know, when you're so used to constant battle, what do you do? Because you're still on guard, but there's no battle to be fought.
Right.
And so navigating that together. As you're speaking, I'm thinking so much of your mindfulness practice and the coaching that you do now. Has that been born out of your own, you know, self-reflection on those times when you weren't able to be present, and reflecting on how maybe you could have done it differently or couldn't have, and helping bring grace to those who are facing similar situations?
Absolutely. I was literally just talking to a friend this morning about how everything I do now is offered purely out of a place of um, going through what felt like living hell and trauma to what are we going to do with this? So we can choose. We can either completely go one direction of self-pity and this is awful. And it was, and we had every reason to go down that road. Or we can say, is there any way we can like climb our way to some joy? Okay, well, if we can even get a little bit of it, then yes, let's go this direction. And so going this direction then started a path of figuring out some healing. We were, it was right in our face that we had incredible codependency issues together. We, as a married couple, we were very enmeshed. We got married very young and we grew up together. We were enabling Holden and his addiction and just had like started to see things brought to our eyes that put us on a path of wellness. And so as I started to get well, and then even got on what I kind of say is like on the other side of that old story. Now I'm just like, oh gosh, if I can offer a teeny tiny glimmer of hope to one person who isn't sure they want to keep living, and that's what I want to do. I have a little saying, it's over there somewhere, but some cards that I make that say your sun will come up again, because that's the one thing I could cling to, like in my ups and downs with God and like, where are you in the middle of this? I was like, I know that the sunshine every day, it comes up, even if it's gloomy day, whether it's sunny, rainy, gloomy, snowy, whatever it is, it does actually come up. And so I think for me, I just want to offer that when it feels like it's the very worst it can possibly be, there's a chance it could get better. So yes, I offer out of that place.
I want to speak to that. That's something that I've heard you say in interviews before, is that you want to make sure women are feeling seen and heard and know that they're going to make it. And the other thing, especially as you talked about like crawling out, I know that people, and I've felt that way myself, but I've really been close to some people who feel like I'm so far from making it. And crawling out just feels so overwhelming when to hear someone say, yeah, I'm going to turn and decide to crawl out. It feels overwhelming. But what I like about your message is you talk about those 2-degree turns, that you're not doing a 180. Some people do. Some people, that's the way that they function. Yeah, I'm at a 180-degree turn. I'm going to go a different direction. Repent. Here we go. But for some people, especially if you're struggling with anxiety or depression or anything that's just really holding your spirit down in a lot of ways, those 2-degree turns to say, okay, we're going to crawl out, but today I'm just going to kind of slither on my belly a little closer to the exit, a little closer to the end of that tunnel. And I don't need to sprint today because I'm just going to make it 2 degrees closer. Can you talk about maybe if you have some examples that you can think of, or just how that really affects the women that you work with when they realize they don't have to do this all at once, but they can make 2-degree turns toward joy. And pretty soon they've gone from, mourning to dancing and, beauty from ashes. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, I'm obsessed with this idea. So I heard about the idea of a 2-degree shift at Onsite, and it has been one of the things that has been the most life-giving for me. And I hear it from my clients a lot, that it's like it's a nugget that everybody can remember and cling to and actually put into practice. So for me, a 2-degree shift means, it might mean saying yes when you really want to say no. I think about my mom. We just lost my stepdad in October. And yet this morning I was doing Marco Polo with my mom and talking about, I just said, I'm so proud of you for saying yes to going to the neighbor's house for Easter, because it ended up being very life-giving. She played games and it was a joyful day, as joyful as it could be without her husband of 30 years. And when she wrote back or videoed back, she said, I thought about it. I kind of wanted to bail, and I ended up saying yes. And that was the best choice. And so that might've been a little bigger than a 2-degree step, because that takes a lot to get out of the house, put clothes on and be functioning and then be engaging with the people you're with.
The saying yes was the 2 degrees, and maybe the getting dressed
Yes.
was another 2, and going was another 2. One thing I want to mention that I've heard in your message, and I want to make sure the audience and anyone listening is very clear, is you're talking about saying yes to things that are life-giving to you, not saying yes when you feel, when you in your spirit say no, when it's not good for you, kind of say no. These are things that are, when you are evaluating it, you're saying yes because this is going to ultimately be good for you, for the world, for the environment. It's different than feeling uncomfortable and saying yes when you 100%. Should absolutely say no.
Yes, not going against your gut or intuition ever, but saying yes to something that you might want to, just because it would feel easier to say no.
Mm-hmm. And that's with mindfulness too. You have to say yes to making the habit, and it's so much easier to just not make a new habit, because habits take a while to form and they take discipline, and that's a 2-degree shift you have to make every single day.
Yes, which I can't believe you just brought that up, because today I have it on my little habit share. Today is day 365 for me of walking. My 2-degree shift was a minimum of 6 minutes per day of walking. So that often turns into more, but like in the winter, it's 6 or 7 minutes. And so today is day 365. So I get to celebrate.
Wow, amazing. And you say you keep that on Habit Tracker?
Habit Share is the app.
Share. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So having those apps too, because I think, sometimes I've like crossed it off, like that I did it these days.
Yes.
But I used to do where it was like 1 push-up, and usually I'd end up doing 10, but 1. And but I like that idea of having the consecutive, because then you can, okay, I've made it to 200. I am going to do my push-up today, no matter what happens.
No matter what. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. There's something about having that streak that is just the accountability. But for me, people often go, did you say 6 minutes? And I was like, yeah, 6 minutes. Why only 6 minutes? Because it's doable. It's 2 degrees. When I set it to be 30 minutes, I didn't do that, but we can do 6 minutes. So I did it.
That's why I have the 1 push-up, because if I'm going to say I'm going to do 20, I may not get down for 20, but if I, it's like, if you're on day, maybe like 15, when you really want to give up, those 2-week marks, before you've gotten to the 3, to just sort of like, before you get into bed, get down and do 1, and all you have to do is 1. You still might end up doing 3, but maybe I just do 1 as well.
Yes, and it's better than 0.
It's better than 0, and it helps you to not just fall off, because like you said, it's doable. You can do 6 minutes. I can do 1 push-up. I've heard people who floss 1 tooth. Again, you end up usually flossing the rest.
That's awesome.
If you can just do the 1. And I've done that before when I've gotten in the habit. Sometimes I get out of the habit, I'll be honest. And I'll just require myself to do 1. It's when I'm really bad. It's so bad for the environment. I love the little stick kind. The other kind gets stuck in my teeth. I can't do it. But so you're helping people be mindful, form better habits. And so I guess in that umbrella of mindfulness, let's talk about mindfulness, because I think it's kind of a buzzword right now, and it's like, oh yes, mindfulness and conscious living. And we don't always know what that means or what it means to individual people. But let's break down mindfulness a little bit. What does that encompass? Because the kind of umbrella is a lot of things, habits and calm and peacefulness and your mental, emotional, and physical state. Tell me more.
I would say, I was going to look up my definition for what is mindfulness. But for me, I love to start with the idea of awareness, because for me, awareness is the very first step for everything. Yes. It's the starting place. If we're aware, we can't undo that. So all of a sudden our eyes are open to something. Well, then we start doing everything differently. You can't unsee that.
Yes.
And
one thing I noticed in your teachings that as I've been listening and reading is it's awareness and non-judgment, because I think about, my book is all about kind of my journey from the fitness industry of health and wellness to more prayer and contemplative thoughts and things. And someone who, notices that they've gained 80 pounds and they're eating all these wrong things, but feels shame to eat the wrong things,
Yes.
often eat the wrong things in private instead, because there's so much shame toward it, or resist them so long and then break and really end up eating everything at once. And so I love when you're talking about, you're becoming aware, but you're not judging that awareness. You're not being wrong for what you're doing. You're just
Yes.
acknowledging it. And if you should choose to do something different, you can. And so that's what I've really loved as I listen to your messages, is this very non-judging way of approaching that awareness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's the biggest thing, is the non-judgment part, because being present, being aware of what we are doing, what's going on around us, not overly reactive or overwhelmed, but when those things come, just being like even in the middle of a meditation and my mind's pinging around, I'll be like, oh yeah, just come back, and not be like, oh, why can't I ever sit through a whole meditation?
Yeah.
But instead just being like, I was thinking, I've got a lot on my mind today. That's okay. I'm back. And I might have to come back 10 times. But to me, that's mindfulness. It's like awareness. You get off focus, you come back, and letting it go, not being hard on yourself, no shame, no judgment. So I love that. And awareness to me is like, it's like a breath of fresh air. It's a new freshness that we get a chance to go, oh, okay, now I'm paying attention to that. And so that's what I think mindfulness is.
Yeah. And I'm at choice. One of the things that one of the monks I used to read and watch a lot, he would talk about, if we're still breathing, we have choice. And but if you're not noticing the breath, and if you're not being aware, it feels like you don't have choice in life, in how you respond, right? It just feels like everything's happening and you're always reacting. But when you can become aware, like you're saying, and not judge that, and have that breath of fresh choice to come at this moment, like you said, I can decide, I can choose whether I'm going to just let this overtake me or crawl out of this, even if that's 2 degrees at a time.
Yes. Come on. We could talk about this all day.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the people who come to you, as well as just like people in your life you've worked with. I know I saw the episode where your son has come to you for coaching as well. So that's, I mean, what a joy and a compliment as a parent that your child actually comes to you for coaching. Like, please coach me through this. So I love that. Tell us about, what are some of the struggles people are experiencing, especially in this time? Like I mentioned at the beginning, we're coming out of a pandemic. So many people are feeling stuck in every area of life, right? Stuck in their houses, literally. They're, maybe stuck in jobs that they do or do not like, or stuck in unemployment and feeling like there's not the opportunities. There's all kinds of stuckness going on, and there's all kinds of pain happening right now, hopelessness, not being accepted, especially unfortunately in faith communities. We struggle with accepting people for who they are. Can you talk about some of the common struggles and what you've been helping people through?
Yeah, so predominantly, besides my son, currently I mostly coach women and do workshops and things with women. And there is a common thread, and it's, who am I? Who am I? Whether they're 22 or 72, who am I? I want to know who I want to be when I grow up. There is self-confidence, was a new session that I added kind of partway through as I was creating my program, and I wasn't sure about it. I didn't have a ton of research on it. And it turns out that that's a hot topic. It was the one that got like the best feedback, and it was the most impactful to a lot of my clients. So self-confidence, identity, who am I? I think also just paying attention to like what happened in your life story that has shaped who you are today. And that can keep us really stuck if we either don't want to identify things or look at things, or maybe we just don't even know that there's things there to take a peek at. But if we're kind of unwilling to look, I call it like looking under the hood. If we're unwilling to look there, I think that keeps us stuck as well.
Yes. Or, sometimes it's like active denial too. Like, I'm
Yes.
fine. Nothing happened in my childhood. That's just a bunch of touchy-feely
Mhm.
stuff because, everybody goes through that, which
Mhm.
everybody does. And it's both and, right?
Mhm.
Everybody goes through some sort of trauma growing up. And I love you spoke about this in, I think it was the Rob Bell interview, that, you know, it doesn't matter if someone's been through more or less, it all hurts the same. And I think when we can acknowledge the hurt, like you said, be seen and know that you're going to be okay, and
Mhm.
then that's the only way to move on from it. Because if we just keep, smacking that inner child and saying, "Sit down and be quiet, you're fine," they're never going to be able to grow into an expressive adult. And then, it's funny. Have worked with CEOs of companies and things, and sometimes the immaturity that comes out in people that are running businesses and running the countries and like different things, and I'm like,
Mhm.
wow, like though they've put on this
Mhm.
adult attire and adult verbiage and all these things, there's still this child in there because they need to get their way no matter what. They're not looking at the broader situation and all these things, but they're just kind of stuck in that age. I think a lot of the work that you do helps to heal that part of the person and
Mhm.
then be able to play nice on the playground, right?
Yes. Yes, 100%. And I have such compassion for the folks that are in that place,
Yeah.
people running companies or, the neighbor down the street. But it's like, it's okay that they are where they are. And if they
Mhm.
don't take a peek at something, and I don't mean excavating necessarily, I don't necessarily think it's always helpful to just go dig up every
It can be
little thing that
dangerous.
happened.
Mhm.
Yeah, that may not be helpful, but just paying attention to like, what are some patterns that I'm noticing? What are people's experience of me? But I have a ton of compassion on the people who haven't done that yet, whether they don't realize that they should, don't know that there are resources available to do that, or they've just said, I can't, it's too much. I
Mhm.
can't look in there,
Yeah.
so
And
it
I
doesn't.
always say, like, alone, a lot of people can't. And it might be if you're just trying to unpack Pandora's box by yourself without a trained coach or therapist or someone alongside of you, that
Mhm.
actually may be a very dangerous thing
Mhm.
to do. And so
Yes.
I think it's really important that you have a professional alongside of you
Mhm.
through unpacking, especially if you kind of shove things down for 30, 40, 50 years.
Mhm. Yes. And I have tons of resources. If anybody needs
Mhm.
resources, I have a lot of credible resources.
Wonderful. So so you're helping people unpack, you're helping them become aware, and you're noticing, especially right now, that there's just this common thread of who am I? How do I have confidence? How do I move through this world? So I came from a background. I was raised in Borneo growing up and like on the equator. And, I went to this incredible international school where everything was celebrated. It was like we have different religions and different skin colors, and this is so beautiful. And let's celebrate everyone's culture. And then, of course, I moved to like Orange County, California. And it's like, if you don't have the same shoes as us, you can't sit at our lunch table. Right. And there was just this complete needing to fit the box of society. Do you
Mhm.
think that part of the reason we maybe have denied who we are and have trouble figuring out who we are is because we have been so pushed into a mold as a society that if you don't fit looking like this, speaking like this, having this kind of job, having that kind of house, yada, 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 you
Mhm.
are not accepted. And therefore, people shove down their true self
Mhm.
to become what society wants them to be. Do you think that's why we're having maybe this crisis of who am I?
Mhm. Absolutely. 100%. And I mean, as soon as you say that, I know we haven't really gone down the faith journey part yet, but it immediately made me think of that's for our family, kind of what was happening in our faith community was our story was not fitting in this cute little Christian box.
Mhm.
It was very colorful and it was coming
Yeah.
out at the seams and it didn't look so cute in church. And now let me preface by saying that we never had anything happen. We love church family, the people who we encountered along the way. We didn't have anyone who was not kind to us. we just realized, kind of looking around, we're like, we don't fit in this box. And especially when our son is looking us in the eyes saying, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. I don't want this. Okay, well then all of a sudden we get to choose. Are we gonna go with what we've always thought about this? Or are we gonna look at our son's eyes and say, what? Like, we choose relationship with you over anything. So yes, I think in that for a while, I felt like I was kind of faking me a little bit, like trying to keep everything in the box to stay in this group. And I don't think anyone along the way made me feel any way. I own that I felt these ways on my own. And so that started, I mean, this is another topic, but just started this whole journey of kind of deconstructing faith and reconstructing what it looks like today.
If you haven't looked up deconstructing faith and reconstructing faith, I really encourage it, because out there in the audience, I think it's something worth taking a look at. I think sometimes people can get too far down the deconstruction that they throw the Jesus baby out with the bathwater, and we have to reconstruct our faith, because we come from a broken world, a flawed humanity. We're all part of it, right? And we can't separate ourselves from being part of that. But we can, like you said, take a look at what we have done right, what we have done wrong, what it doesn't work for us anymore, what does, and seek Christ in our truest self that may not look like this church that we've been going to for X amount of years, truest way that they are. It may be a different expression. And I think that's really hard, because in these churches, because the only way that churches can survive, and I love churches and I love going to churches as well, and I love faith communities and getting together with believers. And as churches, we can take a good hard look at ourselves and say, in order to survive, we sometimes have to say, the way we believe is right and the church across the street is wrong, and you need to come here and fill our seats instead of their seats. And I think a lot of churches are breaking away from that, and we're really evolving as a faith community. And it's up to each of us, like you said, to really go down that deconstructive journey. And especially, I want to mention a statistic, because I've been in many churches who have addressed the LGBTQ issue. And, I grew up in, not just grew up, but I traveled around the world in many. I've been also many churches that say, this is wrong, this is pray the gay away, this, you don't go there, right? But there's a statistic that kids who come from a faith background are usually, I can't remember the exact, a lot percent less likely to commit suicide if they come from a faith-based family, unless they identify as LGBTQ in some way. And then they're 40% more likely to commit suicide. And one of the churches that I attend said, if we save one child, because we have affirmed this, if we save one child, then it is worth everyone who leaves the church, because we made this decision. And so I just want to approach that, because I know that I've come from a time where I'm thinking, well, I think you could pray it away, or you could, maybe just be celibate for the rest of your life and never have a love interest. There was all kinds of things that I thought in the past, and walking alongside people in their true journey, and seeing that the statistics show children are dying because there's no place for them in the church. I think that's something that needs to be discussed. Is that something, when he was coming out, and I know it was a little bit more privately, was it privately because of the concerns of what the faith community how they may react?
Yeah. And it was private because I was freaking out and saying, like, this can't be, which was awful. And I am really bummed that was what I knew at the time. Thankfully, Holden, in his maturity, and as we have grown in our relationship, he has so much grace and kindness. He's like, how else would you have responded? Like, what would anyone do when they're first finding this out, especially given the background that we had in our faith. And so I think, it's, oh boy, it's a tricky topic. It really is.
It really is.
Yeah, there's a lot with it. And I know that it is specifically because Holden had been taught by us, by nursery school, by whatever it was, you know, his little church classes and stuff, that if you were gay, you would go to hell. Well,
Mm,
he had so much confusion in his sweet little heart about, then why did God make me this way if he's then going to send me to hell? So you can imagine the confusion of a young person who like has this heart for God, but is so confused at why it would be bad that God would make him that way. So that was a
or
lot.
trying to find somewhere, because sometimes it would be preached, oh, you had some sort of trauma that made you that way, or some sort of experience that turned you that way. It's not that you were born this way and you
Mhm.
can go back, right? And so then you've got that, is it that way? Where was it? Where should I have figured out that I all of a sudden became this? So there's so much confusion in it for everyone. And but I
Mm,
think you really hit it on the head, is that we're going to choose to love you no matter what. And I
mhm,
think, there's so much, so many issues, whether it's LGBTQ, we have COVID issues, we have vaccine issues, all these things, right? They get very politicized and very choose a
mhm,
side. And I
mhm,
think one thing I was sharing on a podcast recently is that at the end of the day, I have to decide what is loving my neighbor. And you
mhm,
chose to love your son. For me, I was very against getting vaccinated because I had a bad experience with a vaccine in the past, and I finally got it because it's loving my grandma. I spend too much time around her to worry about hugging her and killing her. And so, I didn't want to do that, but it was loving my neighbor.
mhm,
Therefore, I did it.
mhm,
And so I think even if we still, as Christians out there, believe this thing is wrong,
mhm,
still choose to love our neighbor. We
mhm,
can still choose to really love these people, all people, regardless of what their differences are. And
mhm.
maybe, just maybe, we won't have to figure out who we are later on because we're allowed to be that person from the beginning.
Right, right. We don't get all clogged up and put all that stuff in the way of being like, oh, here I am. Hi, here I am. Oh my
Yes,
gosh, what freedom there would be in that. Oh.
absolutely.
Mhm,
So, as a parent, and of course, you can look back and say, I should have done this or I should have done that. But, you know, we do the best we can with the tools we have at that moment. As a parent, if you were speaking to parents dealing with, an issue of a child who's coming out or transitioning, or something like this, what advice would you give them now, on the other side of this by, what about 15 years now, or 13 years on the
mhm,
other side of him first coming out?
10-ish, yeah, 10 or
10ish. Okay.
12.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a big question. I mean, I always go back to Rob Bell's book title, Love Wins. And then I like to add love always wins. I feel
Mm,
like that's just bottom line truth. So I guess what I wished I had done differently was listen and stay curious
mm,
instead of you shouldn't, you this, that, resistance to what he's saying. Like just listen, like leaning in, getting
mhm,
curious, saying, educate me further. I don't know a lot about this. Tell me more.
mhm,
I love
mhm.
my husband says all the time, tell me more. Um,
Uh-huh.
that's what I wished I had done. And I don't know where I would have landed. But I know that it would have taken some really painful years out of the story. Um, yeah, it would have been helpful. I'm grateful that on this side of things, we now have those conversations, or when he brings up other things he's interested in, whatever, I'm like, tell me more about that. I don't know much about that, you know? And
Mhm.
it's just a helpful way to live in general, like for all peoples and all things, is just staying curious, leaning in. And it doesn't mean you ever have to go against what may be fundamentally true for you in here. And that's going to be
Yeah.
different for every person.
Mhm.
It's okay if it just doesn't sit right with somebody. That's they get to feel that and choose that. For me, I wish I had just stayed open, leaned in, been a little more curious and less like resistant and less advicey and I know everything about everything. That's
Mhm.
that's what I wish. Mhm.
And the wonderful thing is that you have these reboots. that have been able to reboot that joy. You know,
Mhm.
I think of, when our phone is messing up, right? Or our computer is doing something it's not supposed to do. When what we can't just fix it, we have to completely reboot.
Yes.
And so, yes, we've all made mistakes in our past. So we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And we have all done things that we wish we could go back and do better. But we can reboot. And
Mhm.
so, um, as people decide, hey, I want to reboot, I want to become more aware, more mindful,
Mhm.
what does that experience of coaching with you, taking one of your courses look like?
Mm. Well, it looks lots of different ways. I have a monthly self-care call that I offer at no cost. The first Thursday of right now, it's the first Thursday of the month, 11 a.m. Mountain Time. And it can look like my Rediscovering You program, which is everything from identity, story, self-care, self-confidence, forgiveness, intentions, boundaries. We kind of cover a lot. And then
Mhm.
one of the final sessions is the moving forward. But I do that through individual and group coaching. I also offer workshops. Like I did a boundaries workshop called Empowered, because we get empowered the more we understand boundaries. And so I offer things like that. And then I also do retreats. I do them in my home, pretty intimate retreats, yoga retreats, mindfulness retreats, and just started these super fun ones in these vintage Airstream trailers in
I
a
saw
couple
one
hours.
of those. It looked fun.
Girl, I want you to come sometime. They are really cool and they're super intimate too. And what I'm finding is that having an intimate space to really dig in can just be life-changing. One of the gals said it was literally life-changing for her. So yeah, so those are some of the ways that I offer that. And again, I do it all because I've learned some things over the last few years that have helped me choose life and continue to choose life. And I want to share the things that I figured out that were actually doable and tangible. There are a lot of
Mhm.
things that people can tell you. You can try this, you can try that, you can do drastic things. And sometimes those things weren't helpful. They felt too overwhelming for me.
Yes.
So I love just talking about the little things that make massive differences.
I also want to talk about those small, intimate groups. For some reason, as you were talking about it, it reminded me of a quote that I cannot quote verbatim, but C.S. Lewis spoke about friendship and how many people will actually not even have a true friend that they can open up with and truly tell everything about with in their life. Um, and so when you have these really small, intimate groups where you're really getting to know a small group of people well, you develop these deep rooted friendships that go beyond the retreat, that go beyond the course experience, because they're people that you can open up and share your vulnerability with
Mhm.
without having to worry if you're still going to be loved and part of the big group, right?
Mhm. Yes.
And
So
so I love that about those really small intimate courses and intimate
good.
retreats, because that's where you develop depth with people, the kind of people that, you know, when you don't even want to admit to yourself what you may have done or thought or whatever, you can talk it through with someone who will give you grace. Because sometimes I think the reason why any of us are not graceful with others sometimes because we're not graceful with ourselves, right? We're hardest on ourselves.
Totally.
So I love that you provide that really intimate environment.
Mhm.
Where can people find all these wonderful resources?
Oh gosh. Okay. So Instagram, I'm on, and everything is under my name, Leith McHugh, LeithMchugh. It's kind of a mouthful. Instagram, Facebook, and I do have a website. It's kind of under construction, but it's there, leithmchugh.com. And yeah, those are probably great places to start. Would love to talk to anyone that has, if anything is resonating about any of this. I know that, for a lot of clients that come to me, they're not sure what they want. They are just longing for something different, ready for some breakthrough, ready to just sit up a little bit taller. And there's like, I think there's like a desire to kind of shine underneath. There's like hesitation and doubt, and they know there's something that needs to come up out of that, but they don't know exactly what that is. They just know they want more. And so that's where I just love to get into that. So
And isn't
um,
that the thing about stuckness? Like, you don't always know what you need. You just know it's not right where you're at. And so
Yes.
to have someone who can really knows the right questions, is intuitive, and really sees you. And I know that's something that your clients always say is, you really saw me.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you can't see yourself, to have someone who really sees you and
Mm-hmm.
helps you discover those things that you need to
Mm-hmm.
get unstuck, is really priceless. So I'm really excited. Everybody make sure to check out Leith McHugh on all those platforms. We'll try to get as many up on the screen as we can with the network. And thank you so much, Leith, for being on the show. It has been such a pleasure and a joy.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun. You made this really fun.
I'm glad. And thank you all for watching. We just love seeing the numbers increasing every month and your support. And until I see you again, may the Lord bless and keep you, cause his face to shine upon you, and nourish your soul.